Good evening everybody, welcome to Windows on the World, broadcasting from a secret location somewhere in the northwest of England. Yes, I've been travelling around quite a lot. I was in Glastonbury for a week and I did some sightseeing down there, and I've been to an ancient historic site which is going to be featured in a documentary I'm doing about the Smithfield Martyrs, which is a very interesting subject. It's all about heretics. You know, those people who can think. That's what heresy means. A heretic is someone who's able to choose. And that's something which is very rare these days, because this social engineering is reaching its zenith. I've never known anything quite like it. And we have to look at the way the media is and the intelligence services actually feeding the media. We talk about this sort of stuff a lot, and tonight we're going to talk about it even more, but in a slightly different way. I've got some great examples which will contrast against each other and hopefully give a bit of insight. But first I wanted to read something out, and it's from Manly P. Hall's Secret Destiny of America. And of course this is allegedly a book that had a huge influence on how America was shaped and formed through, in effect, Freemasonry. But when we read this out now, and we will in a minute, I've got a few paragraphs here to read, you'll see that what's actually been put in place is much more of a socially engineered paradigm, because when you actually read this stuff out as it was written by Manly P. Hall, I don't think what's happened now was exactly what he had in mind. He was actually advocating something with a little bit more autonomy than we see around us. Now he states in the opening pages of this book, The Secret Destiny of America, which is basically stating that America was kind of a new Atlantis that was going to rise up, and in a way we can see the results of that and what he was trying to get at. But I don't think he would have predicted the way things have turned out with this narrow opinion corridor, which is what we're calling it, and this sort of cult of complete unreality, where there's one fake reality and anything outside the fake reality is dismissed, attacked and abused. So I'm just going to read this out. He says, "Our world is ruled by inflexible laws which control not only the motions of the heavenly bodies, but the consequences of human conduct. These universal motions, interpreted politically, are impelling human society out of a state of autocracy and tyranny to democracy and freedom. This motion is inevitable, for the growth of humans is a gradual development of mind over matter, and the motion itself represents the natural and reasonable unfolding of the potentials within human character. Those who attempt to resist this motion destroy themselves." Now what he's talking about here, in effect, in a way, is natural law, and he's trying to give some guiding principles to that. But that's not the way things have turned out. He carries on. "To cooperate with this motion and to assist nature in every possible way to the accomplishment of its inevitable purpose is to survive. Thousands of years before the beginning of the Christian era, many enlightened thinkers discovered the will of God as expressed through nature in the affairs of men." Now he's talking about natural law again here, which has completely been taken out of the equation. I'm not advocating this kind of thinking, by the way. It's just that it seems to have got completely skewed even this idea of this new order that they wanted to impose basically through a kind of priest class has been completely and utterly subverted to what we've got now. He carries on. They made known their discoveries in terms of religions, philosophies, sciences, arts and political systems. These first statements are now the admired monuments of ancient learning, available to men of today. They are generally ignored. Now that's actually quite true. You can see that that's going on. Philosophy set up its house in the world to free men by freeing them of their own inordinate desires and ambitions. He's talking about philosophy here, the power of philosophy and the thoughts behind that. It saw selfishness as the greatest crime against the common good, for selfishness is natural to all who are untutored. Now that's very interesting, isn't it? Selfishness is natural to all who are untutored. And what we see now everywhere is the cult of me. Everyone's shouting as loud as they can to be heard, and none of them have anything to say. They have no insight. This happens a lot. I'm not talking about everybody here, by the way. I'm talking about generally the way things are being engineered. So that's really interesting line. I'm going to read that again. It saw selfishness as the greatest crime against the common good. Now, the common good was what we were talking about last week. Communitarianism, the common good, and we realised that that's not what it's about. It's not about the common good. It's about accepted norms, and basically anything outside that is not going to be accepted. And it means collectivism, which means like things like what we were talking about last week, even down to community policing, which is where crimes basically don't get solved because they're not really in the public interest. The actual rights of the individual are usurped by the whole, the masses. In other words, it's not in the public interest for them to even know that crimes are being committed, so let's pretend that they're not. That's actually what they're doing. And it says it recognised that the mind has to be trained in the laws of thinking. We talked about that, didn't we? That half of 1% of the population are taught to think and the rest aren't. So that's another really interesting point he's brought up there. In fact, these few paragraphs are full of debating points of the things that we've been talking about. And it knew that the democratic commonwealth can be a reality only when our world is a world of self-ruling men. Now we've got actually the opposite now. We've got people who can't think. So this is quite interesting stuff, and this is just the opening few pages. And so it is from the remote past, from the deep shadows of the medieval world, as well as from the early struggles of more modern times, that the power of American democracy has come. It's very interesting stuff, this, and I think I'm going to go back and read more about this secret destiny of America, because I read it years ago, and what was interesting is that I've actually pulled out paragraphs which were not the paragraphs I would now pull out, because all of this stuff that we've got into about the social engineering has kind of changed things round. In other words, the things that weren't important and went sort of for granted, really, the things that were taken for granted are now absolutely been turned over. And he carries on, man has passed out of the stage of savagery and become a civilized creature with the development of social consciousness. Social consciousness, now where did that go? We don't seem to have that at all. Civilization is a collective state. Now it is going in, but I don't think he means going into collectivism. I think he's stating that we all need to educate ourselves, which is the opposite of what actually seems to have happened. In our collective type of life, the isolationist is a detriment to himself and a menace to others. Now that is true, but what's actually happened is the person who can think for themselves has been defined as a menace to all others. Yeah, the person who can think for themselves has now been defined as a menace to all others. Yeah, that's what I would say. Carries on, there is a great difference between isolationism and intellectualism. Development of the mind releases the individual from mob psychology. Well, that's brilliant, isn't it? Because we can see the last couple of days what's happened with these mad protests, these fake protests, these fake paradigms that have been set up to divide and rule. So yeah, that's a really good point he's brought in there. There's a great difference between isolationism and intellectualism. Development of the mind releases the individual from mob psychology. Well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what he'd be thinking now when he looked at this so-called new fake paradigm with this new liberalism, which is intolerant of everything outside it, which isn't even a philosophy. It's got no philosophy to it at all. It's just got mind control. So a true thinker becomes a force for good within group life. Well, isn't that true? And I would like to think that our listeners are the true thinkers, and they become a force for good within the group, which is this it's a group without actual names. It's a group of people who contact me and who we're going to be talking to up and down the country, and who can think for themselves, and they're not just amassed under a banner of listeners of Windows on the World. They listen to loads of different things. I mean, the people who contact us, I'm going to get into this tonight. I'm very, very encouraged by it, and I'm going to get into why other people are discouraged about what's going on, and it's very easy for that to happen. So yeah, if his intellectual powers lure him away from the practical problems and values of his world, he can no longer make his contribution to the social unity. Yeah, if his intellectual powers lure him away from the practical problems and values of his world, he can no longer make his contribution to the social unity. Well, that's quite an interesting point as well. So there were some pearls of wisdom in the works of Manly P. Hall there. It's called The Secret Destiny of America. And I just dug that out because I've been looking at on my travels that I used to have in my library but have now been put into storage. So I just thought that was a very good way to start the show. Now, it is a good way to start this show because that's basically the secret destiny of America, this alleged Freemasonic conspiracy versus communitarianism, which is what we've got now. So during the last few years, I've been looking at delusion. Now, we did a show called New Age Agenda Explained, all about the way that useful idiots, or in this case, useless idiots most of the time, have been co-opted into this New Age agenda, which is all about narcissism, and it's about lack of knowledge, really. It's about the ego, and it's generally concerns people who think that they don't have an ego anymore. And I like that quote last week from Mascara Snake, saying that she'd lost her ego, or they'd lost their ego, but thought it might be behind the sofa, you know. I mean, these things do become a bit kind of overplayed, you know, when you talk about all this stuff. I mean, we covered all that in that show, really, about these sort of fake Hindu cults. I'm not talking about real Hindus here. And I think people got a bit kind of confused with well, certain people got a little bit confused with what was being said there. But basically, this use of these Hindu cults was all about people acquiescing and not taking responsibility for themselves, and saying that, well, I can't think about that, it's too negative, and letting everything wash over them. Now, the opposite of that, I suppose, would be Zen Buddhism, where you actually participate actively in the here and now, but you're not of it. I always found that was quite interesting. And of course, that's the Japanese principle. I think the Japanese philosophy is quite interesting with all that. Zen Buddhism, I found some of that quite useful, much useful than the Tibetan Buddhism, in my opinion. You know, I'm not don't want to get into arguments about belief systems at all, really. But yeah, we've talked about it a lot, this kind of delusion, and how the media actually accentuates that delusion and works off it, and how society actually flourishes through it, this new form of society. Well, let's call it communitarianism. We did last week. We've talked about it, in great depth. We're now in an arena of complete disinformation, which feeds the delusion. Now, the noisemakers, I mean, it's quite interesting, this, because if you go into a pub now, you'll get people who can actually sit around a table, and they actually modulate their voices so each other can hear them. But there seems to be these people who just shout at each other, and it gets louder and louder and louder. And I don't think it's just that they play loud music in pubs now. I think it's just this kind of mindless mentality. And it's the opposite of what we're going to talk about as we go along tonight, which is about awareness and consciousness. And this word consciousness is terribly, terribly misused, I think, and especially by people who are into this sort of delusion about basically they're promoting their own egos through this kind of new age agenda. But yeah, the noisemakers don't listen, and it's just like that. It's just like such heavy programming that almost completely immune to what's going on around them. This is awareness again. It's like there seems to be no level of awareness. There seems to be no ability to actually go into yourself and look outwards, or basically be aware that you're a consciousness and then observe what's around you in a fairly blank way. In other words, without any thoughts attached to it. And you can see that most people just can't do that. I mean, it's always been for the sort of priest class type thing, but obviously we're saying two things here: that it's been sold through the ego, and also it's kind of been misunderstood. But I'm going to get to the point of this in a minute, if you're wondering where it's going, because it's something that I pulled off Facebook that an author had written, which I think is quite interesting. It sums quite a lot of things up. I'm going to get to that in a bit. But yeah, the social engineers' successes have gone way beyond their own expectations, and the ridiculously simple and narrow corridor of imposed conditioning can be seen in the fake intelligence services created alt and far right. Now, we talked about this quite a lot. I mean, it's incredible, really, that people still fall for this stuff. Now, this alt and far right is just a term now used against anyone outside this retarded imposed reality where trivia is king. It has to be trivial. And if you look at some of your public officials and the things that they put on so-called social media, you'll realise that trivia is king. That is it. It's actually the new emperor is trivia. We've reported widely on it. I call it the cult of nothing, actually, a lot of this stuff. It really does now seem that there's a new world of knowledge retardant zombies, actually. There's a new world of knowledge retardant zombies out there. And if you don't believe me, check out the fake protests of the recent past, which is the last couple of days, and the people who've been on them, where the population have been engaged in a massive diversion and brilliantly missing the point, according to fake news sources, which actually banned a march in favour of the recent visit by America's president. And why didn't these same warriors for justice protest when the bought and paid for Soros asset Obama visited the UK? Why didn't they protest at him, his full support and his authorisation within days of coming into power when he was selected, for these drone strikes that killed hundreds of civilians, and within days after that he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize? I mean, why don't they actually get onto this? This is something I really can't understand. And you get these people in the corridor of accepted norms, which is this basic extremist ideology, which isn't really an ideology because it's not based on anything. It's based on just intolerance of things that they've been programmed to hate. So basically, when they talk about this hate speech, it's like it's unreal. I can't get my head around it, because a friend of mine was on that march, and he said they banned people marching to support Donald Trump. Now, has this ever happened before? Well, it's okay. Let's say he was democratically elected, but has anything like this happened before? I don't think it has. I think this is beyond post-truth now. It's absolutely unbelievable. And why did they not protest it? About Obama, I just don't get it. It says here, 12 people were arrested as thousands of protesters descended on Whitehall for a rally in support of jailed far-right activist Tommy Robinson and US President Donald Trump. So what the hell has this Tommy Robinson character got to do with Donald Trump? He's got nothing to do with him. In fact, it's so absurd that they would even lump those two together. So if you support this Tommy Robinson fraudster character, then you must also support President Trump, and you must also be far right. What's Martin saying? Trump marches. Most people did not understand what they were actually protesting. No, that's very true, because we did a show about 18 months ago about that women's march, and it wasn't a women's march at all. It was just it was a propaganda march for banks. It was set up by some European bank. It was all about this diversity agenda, but none of them there knew what they were even there for. So Martin's absolutely right. They didn't actually know why they were there. So Martin's carrying on here. Yes, they were allowed to have a static assembly, but not allowed to march there or away. Yeah, well, my friend was down there and he said, yeah, they weren't allowed to march. That's right. They weren't allowed to go anywhere. So the police must be very confused about all this, I think, because when I went down to Whitehall, when it was the EDL and the Antifa Social Justice Warrior Collective, which I actually had a bit of an interaction with, and none of them could actually put up any reasoned argument as to why they were there or what they were protesting against. They didn't know what they were protesting against. Martin said on pain of a £200 fine. Yeah, well, I haven't even looked into a lot of this stuff because, I mean, I'm talking about it, but it's kind of trivial. But I'm just using it as an example of what the forefathers, the real forefathers of America, foresaw and what it has now become. I think people like even Manly P. Hall would be turning in his grave about what's happened, you know. But that's just part of this kind of unbelievable situation. So everything that MI5 want the public to believe has to be linked to the fake far right, as stated by Mark Rowley, head of MI5, who resigned. He was saying that, yes, there's a growing threat of the far right. You know, I mean, where did ISIS go? Well, they use them when they need to, I suppose. But, I mean, it just means that all this they have to do is inject some fake threat out into the intelligence services and the think tanks. And next minute, that's it. Well, that is it. There's nothing else. There's nothing outside of it. So when you mention a few facts about the current president, like the slashing of bureaucratic red tape, which is a massive thing, it's so important now, and which was killing businesses. Obama was killing businesses and enterprise, and that's what's happening in this country. I mean, that is the plan. But, I mean, there's a few things that I'm not in agreement with Trump. And basically, I'm seeing it in two ways here. His absolute slavish support of Israel and the Jerusalem thing, the old thing. Is it because he's just trying to appease Israel so they don't want any, so they can't ask for any more because he's given them everything? Or is he just completely controlled by them? I don't know. Throwing it out there. I don't think it really matters ultimately, because the only thing we can concentrate on, I think, is this kind of the strategy behind it all. The strategy to me is interesting because I think our listeners, the Windows on the World listeners, will get this about the strategy. The strategy about it is so important. It's the most important thing, I think, to understand the strategy and react accordingly. Otherwise, it becomes utterly exhausting, even trying to engage with this stuff, because it's so out there and banal now. And yeah, it's effective. The other thing that effectively has happened under the Trump administration is stopping the war in Syria, basically, completely curtailing it. And then the mind virus kicks in on the full-on stupids, and they go, oh, but he's sexist, you know. I mean, so stopping a war is sexist. It's but you couldn't have that argument with them. So it's kind of it's this corridor of the Blairites and the Tories, or call them one party really, and what's outside it. And actually, it's quite encouraging. I was looking at this fella's video on YouTube. He was getting a bit kind of sentimental about this country, which I can't do anymore. but he, in a way, was right, and he was saying, why can't people see through this, that they've been led with this fake far right and this Tommy Robinson thing? Why can't they see that it's been engineered by the people who are controlling them? And things will never get better as long as people are kicking off in the wrong direction, which is obviously the point that we've been making for a long time. But this is also known in the intelligence community as the distraction principle, and it's available on the leaked GCHQ slideshow, which is basically the same template used by your local Politburo, your councils. Deny, disrupt, degrade, deceive, and the distraction principle. The distraction principle is used by magicians. I used to do card tricks and magic tricks because I was so fascinated as to how they worked. And the illusion is absolutely incredible. Like the cups and balls trick, for instance. When I learned how that was done, I thought, that's genius. It really looks as though those balls are going through the cup. And this is all about our expectation and the way our minds have been controlled. So when people say, well, it happened because I saw it on telly, I mean, you couldn't make a more banal statement than that. You just couldn't if you understood what television was and how it's constructed. Martin's going, yeah, Martin's busy in the chat tonight. I haven't actually advertised this show because I've been quite busy doing sort of research and catching up with things. But I'm going to start promoting the show. But very encouragingly, yeah. If you can subscribe to Spreaker and follow us on Spreaker, we're getting a few more followers on Spreaker, but what's great about Spreaker now is the Spreaker views are completely dwarfing the YouTube views. So if we get 1,500 views or 2,000 views a week, which we do on some videos, we're getting 1,500 to 2,000 on Spreaker. Now, this last week's show, we've had over 1,500 on Spreaker. We're going out on 2 other radio stations as well. I don't know what their listenership is, but they are promoting us, which is great. It's Mad Wasp Radio. This fab radio in Manchester that still puts us out. But Mad Wasp are actually promoting us, which is great. So madwaspradio.com. Thanks a lot to Dee and David Preston there, who started that radio station. And there's some interesting music on there as well if you like a bit of a change and maybe sometimes kicking it old school. So Martin said the BBC are crowing that Saturday was 250,000 people protested Trump. No, there was no evidence of that whatsoever because the papers just said there were thousands, and well, what we see in newspapers is a photograph. Well, a photograph, a picture tells 1,000, a picture speaks 1,000 words, but a picture is there basically just as a social engineering thing, really, because that's what newspaper photographers are there for. They dare to get a picture which tells the story. So the picture has to tell the story. And that's why you get all these famous pictures, that look like actors and they're from these world events, because everything has to be contrived. You can't put up there something that's real, heaven forbid. So that's it. Funny that if you look at that slideshow, that's leaked GCHQ slideshow, even if some of it was a bit bodged up, I don't think it was actually, because it was to do with cyber magicians, basically being deceived on the internet, sleight of hand, and the distraction principle. The distraction principle they referred to a lot, and they had things like photographs of inflatable tanks that were used in the Second World War, and all this stuff which is put there just to completely hoodwink the audience. So they even had pictures of Houdini up and these illusionists. So that's what we're dealing with here. And those, if you ever want to actually test your ability and just to see how easily fooled your eyes are, and the way that your psyche will react, have a look at card tricks and how they're done, and how cards are forced, how you force a card on somebody and they go, oh my God, that is my card. And it's such an incredible thing. I used to work in Covent Garden selling card tricks many years ago, and the psychology behind it's fascinating, because what you're doing, you're giving the public a performance. That's what they want. They want this performance. So the performance, once they're watching you, you can easily distract people. You can get them to look wherever you want them to look. And that's what a lot of this stuff's about. They're just making you look in the wrong direction. That's all it is. It's called misdirection in magic. And I used to get these old boys coming up. All right, son, take a card. Come on, take that. And I said, no, I know what you're doing, and I know you're forcing the card. But they always wanted to practice on somebody, you see. And there was this old boy who used to come up and do these coin tricks. They were very skilled, these people. They probably all died out by now. But that close-up magic is a very, very interesting thing if you want to study how easy it is to basically to misdirect people. So, but I just wanted to get onto this, yeah. Now, when the UK has MPs like Owen Jones and Chuka Ramona and actually agrees to be insulted, to have their intelligence insulted by them all day on what's known as social media, I think that is a clear indication that civilization has fallen. And I think that goes back to what we're saying at the beginning of the show. I think, because on the front cover it's got obviously the dollar bill, the New Order, New World Order, Novus Ordo Seclorum, and the all-seeing eye detached from the pyramid. I think if Manly P. Hall could see what's going on now, the eye would be on the floor or hiding behind the pyramid out of sheer embarrassment. It's kind of funny that when society's gone to the point where even Freemasonry, the people that were writing about this, seem to be intellectual champions, then we know it's all gone completely wrong. So the consensus followers of the fake reality are buying into Trump being sexist and this false opposition by supporting this fraudster, this Tommy Robinson. Now, he's got about 4 different names, right? He got put in prison for using some fake passport. He's openly involved in a mortgage fraud with Deborah Rothschild, and he's openly fully funded by Israel, along with his partner in subversion, Katie Hopkins, and a few others who we have mentioned. And they all read from the same hymn sheet, and they all fail to actually address the issue, the real issue of what's going on. And unless you do that, then it's counterintelligence. Sorry about that, but Tommy Robinson is a counterintelligence exercise. A friend of mine went down there, actually said, yeah, but I'm not really too bothered about that. It's about free speech, which is fair enough, actually, I think. But to isolate the issue with all these things is the most important thing. So if it's about free speech, let's make it about free speech. Let's make it about the people who've been genuinely shut down, like the hundreds of books that have been banned by Amazon, and the shutting down of the narrative on so-called social media. So basically, we've covered there's no advantage for the new imposed indoctrinated society to get more than 0.5% of the population to think. And I think that was a really good point, that going into that system of education and John Dewey and all these social engineers. And if anyone hasn't seen that, Social Engineers Then and Now, have a look at that on YouTube, but preferably on Windows on the World or on BitChute. So it's good that we're actually now surpassing our YouTube figures on Spreaker, so that's great. I'd encourage everyone to listen on Spreaker, because I don't know how long we're going to be on YouTube, and I don't want to get terribly disappointed when it's taken off. What is the real issue then? Well, the real issue is who's funding them and who's subverting our government, and we have to look at that. That's the stuff we're not allowed to talk about, and they're the people who are funding this fake alt-right business. It's entirely funded by people who are friends of Israel. We can't talk about that though. The whole fake right is just as stupid as the extreme fake left, and it's drones that were working over enthusiastically for their own destruction, and that's what people who support this fake alt-right are doing. They're working towards their own destruction. That's the whole point of it. The only winners of this will be the Blairites and the Tories, who are both the same party, who said are in furthering the third party interest of which no one is allowed to speak, and which I've just spoken about. Facebook and YouTube are now creating fake news content. Yeah, they're creating their own fake news content as trusted sources, and YouTube are even now facilitating their own trivial voices through a mentoring program. So YouTube are mentoring useful idiots. So it's all over, it's all over, it's everywhere. So the writer on consciousness, Anthony Peake. Now this is really interesting and takes us further into what we want to get into. We're probably going to do an hour tonight, so I'm going to keep this
quite tight now. So this, he's a writer on consciousness, Anthony Peake. I'm not a massive fan of what he does. I don't know about what he does, but I'm reading this out because it's an absolute confirmation of what we've been talking about, and the way that these New Age people and, well, all the people who are deluded into a socially engineered paradigm are basically suffering from. Now, he states in this Facebook post, says 2,100 people have booked to see Mooji, that's Mooji, who's one of these gurus. You know the type. He uses a lot of Hindu philosophy there, and it's all about, basically, I would say, very little. The great thing about this vagueness and not engaging with anything negative is that you never have to face any form of reality. And most of these gurus, I'm not talking about him, I don't know about him, but the ones that I've encountered, they've been absolute narcissists, sociopaths, and even psychopaths. And people fall for it time and time again. It's like leaders of this the alternative news media, the ones who appear from nowhere. You know the ones, they're often linked to the police or ex-police or whatever, and they all of a sudden got loads of views, and they are controlling the narrative. And I've seen it time and time again, and it's not something we can get into this week, but he says, right, quite fair, he says, I have no issue with Mooji and what he teaches. Indeed, I've received messages from very good friends that his message is of great validity. That as it may be, but this tells me many things, but most particularly that the masses are not interested in a scientific, rational and logic-based model, but a comforting New Age warmth that is not actually based upon anything. Now that's a very good point he's making there, based upon anything objective or scientifically valid. Now that is my point of view with this completely, and why when we cover these areas of the paranormal or anything to do with what they call parapsychology, I go to the people who are really looking into it objectively. And objectivity is not something that these ego-led people like. They don't want to engage with anything like that because they might have to think. And what a lot of this stuff is about is not thinking. In other words, becoming a useful idiot. He carries on, I've spent a decade trying to get my ideas and concepts across to a public and community that I really thought would have found my ideas refreshing and a way forward. My approach has been to seek out validity for the teachings of Mooji and his ilk with a logically and scientifically valid model. That's fair enough. This has not happened. I've been excluded and ignored by the organisations I thought would have really taken to my ideas, and I have never managed to break through to the David Icke, David Wilcock, Russell Brand world. And he carries on, not that I ever really wanted to. I have watched as other people have come up with watered down models of CTF and have been recognised as incredibly revolutionary thinkers such as Robert Lanza and his incredibly original biocentrism theory that was published 2 years after ITLAD. Now, I'm not going to go into what those are because I don't know. I have in the past 12 years watched as other authors have jumped on the bandwagon that ITLAD created in 2006, and I guess that this is the last straw. As I have stated many times, I really should have made out that ITLAD had been channeled from the planet Tharg by ascended masters or 20,000-year-old Atlantean priests. Isn't that just the truth? There's so much of that about. I mean, the ascended masters, you know. That's a brilliant one. That I love that. And of course, the Maitreya. I've seen so many examples of this over the past couple of weeks that it's laughable, and it is actually turning into a circus. It's like a comedy, the whole thing. He says, maybe I should have started doing talks with a weird high-pitched voice. Maybe I should have claimed to be the reincarnation of Nostradamus or somebody similar. I cannot do Edgar Cayce because somebody else has already grabbed that one, which I think is that David Wilcock. And the thing is about all this stuff is that, again, it's like people just love things that are woolly and fantasy without really having to put any effort into it. He said, many organisations that I thought would have found my work of real interest have simply ignored me. dozens of fellow authors that I've contacted in good faith with a suggestion that we work together on pushing the boundaries have simply ignored me too many times to list in this regard. I am now 64 years old and I am tired and totally disillusioned. I've tried with my 10 books to really challenge the present scientific paradigm using their own tools: logic, rationality and systematic thinking. I really believed when I embarked upon this exercise that after more than a decade that somebody somewhere would have really picked up on what I'm trying to get across and have broken the ideas through to the mass media. Hang on a minute. Yeah, this has not happened. Maybe this is to do with my limitations as a writer or as a public speaker, or maybe it is simply to do with the fact that people are happier with bullshit. Carries on. So he carries on here, right? He says, take this as my resignation posting. Maybe the world needs David Icke, Muji, David Wilcock, Russell Brand, Jay-Z, Knight, Bashar, etc., etc. What they obviously don't need is people like me. My Facebook sites will cease to be in the next few days when I will claim my life back from this failed adventure. I would like to thank the many thousands of you who have been part of this adventure, but I think now is the time to pull the plug. And a lot of this is about, he was going to put some talks on at this place called Alternatives, which they have at St James Church in Piccadilly. And that is a bastion of new age waffle and change agents, in my opinion. There are some people on there, obviously, who slipped through the net who are very good. But when you look at most of it, it's a load of, disempowered new agers, really. And that's what he's having a go at. In other words, that they'll pay fortunes to see someone waffling on the same way that all of these gurus waffle on about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, but they don't want to actually hear any clarity. Now, he did receive a lot of support after this was posted, but this is the entire point of what our shows are about. If I'd made up an enigmatic backstory or faked some kind of source, like I have an insider, I have it on very good authority from someone within the ministry, like a lot of these people do, the ones in suits who seem to have some inside information, and they seem to make predictions which never happen. This is the thing. It's just all theatre. But if I'd have made up, some kind of channeled entity, or basically made up a backstory or faked some kind of source, like channeled Candy Floss, I reckon the viewing figures of Windows on the World would be through the roof by now. I really do, because when I look at the rubbish that people watch, it has hundreds of thousands of views, and none of them have got anything to say, in my opinion. I can't find any information in there. It's like they're information-free zones, and it'd be promoted everywhere, be all over Facebook and Google, and yeah, Martin said, only a few on the chat tonight. I think what happened was a few weeks ago, people got locked out of chat, but that's no longer the issue. There's, the thing is that there's a lot of people listening, but they're not signing into chat. We have got very good listening figures, actually. And what's great is after the shows, they all turn up in greater numbers, basically. So when the show goes out, it goes out on a YouTube, it goes out on a BitChute, and it starts getting a lot of hits on BitChute and YouTube Sunday night, mainly YouTube, really. But over the next couple of days and over the week, we're doing really well on the listening figures, so I'm really glad about that. But I've found our audience, which again, this guy's got really disillusioned, but I don't think he's given up. He's just said that, and loads of people have come to pat him on the back and say, no, we're interested, we love what you're doing. So it's kind of encouraged him a bit, which is good, I suppose. But I've found, though, that our audience are sort of well-balanced, very discerning, and they send me brilliant information. They're also actually doing something useful. And this is the thing I really want to reiterate, and thanks to everyone who's contacting me, because I've got people from all walks of life contacting me now, and it doesn't matter whether they're suffering through universal credit, or they're in an old people's home and they're getting bullied, basically, or they're in what was sheltered accommodation and it's been taken over, or they're seeing what's happening on their doorsteps with all these developments, or they're being a victim of property theft by the state, and we get plenty of those. Then these people are all sensible and they're on it, which is great, and they're contacting us. Now, what I've been doing over the past few weeks, I have been helping quite a lot of people, But it's kind of it's a bit crazy that people they ask me a lot of questions which can be answered through the website, and what is a big problem is just the basics that they need to know, which is the administrative stuff, So basically, the listeners to this show don't make up silly names for themselves unless it's tongue-in-cheek, and we can see that in the chat. We don't have any thing like that, unless they actually have been. Yeah, this is a good point. We don't have any real silly people with silly new age names contacting, which was great, because I did get that when I started, when I was at the People's Voice. We got quite a lot of that sort of stuff, and we've filtered it all out now. I have come across some insane narcissism over the past few weeks on my travels, and also I've met some really interesting characters. I've been doing some historical research, which I'm going to be putting out into new shows. I've actually been travelling quite a lot recently, so basically what I'm doing is I'm doing this short show tonight, which is summing up a lot of the things I've been looking at over the past couple of weeks, So we do cover the big picture, and it's not channeled through Saint Germain or some ascended master, but usually from checkable sources, and that's something that I want to keep doing. As part of a test for New Agers, I'm going to mention something which might be a negative experience for the mentally helpless. Only joking, but this is interesting, right? I put a thing up about the Dartford toll bridge, and it's had less than 1,000 views, and it's called Dartford Toll Bridge. Should you pay? Now, people are getting bailiffs notices from Marston's and getting their vehicles taken because they haven't paid the £2.50 charge on the Dartford crossing. Now, that bridge should have been paid for years ago. I think that's absolutely outrageous what they're doing, and it's owned by this French company. And also, what ties into this, but have a look at this Dartford toll bridge. Should you pay? I put it up there a year ago, but this fella's written something that's very typical of what's going on, and the sort of people that contact us are telling us, right? He's saying basically that it's gone to Marston's, this debt, and he's now basically in a situation where his business is under threat. He says, I'm currently in the middle of my final 28 days notice to make a payment of £426 to Marston's for failing to pay the charge. I missed all the letters that were sent to me, apart from one which I opened. The fine at that point was up to £180, which shocked the life out of me. And it was only at that point I realised I hadn't paid the toll for several months earlier when I passed through the tunnel. Now, this is an interesting point, because on Dartford toll, if you're not familiar with it, you don't see the signs, because it's got 5 lanes, you can't see the signs from all the lanes. So if there's a big lorry passing you on the inside, you don't see the signs. So he says, I called Highways England to explain that it was an oversight, and because I only use the crossing maybe once a year, it's something that by the time I got home I'd completely forgotten about. Now, this affects millions of people, right? Millions. I explained that I felt I had been conned, because those of us that hardly ever use it are more than likely going to forget to pay it, as it's not part of our normal day and night, and had the barriers been left in place, I would not be in this position, as I would have paid at the time. Now, that's a really good point. They said they would make a note on the system before the phone call was abruptly ended. Now, this is a thing that happens a lot. If you start questioning these call centres, they often just put the phone down on you, and you've been kept waiting for ages. He says, I was left none the wiser. I did not have the money to pay, and so I left it, because at that point I was really struggling for any money. I'm a bathroom fit and had just been robbed of a payment by a customer, which left me completely broke and desperate. After a couple more months, and I was still in a terrible situation financially, then I received another letter from Marston saying I now owe £426 and payment must be made immediately. I spoke to the bailiff, who then agreed he could extend it for 28 days and would then be back for full payment, or he will take my work van away for auction. Now, that's what these people are like, They will actually take your work vehicle. Now, they're not allowed to take things that are to do with your work, but vehicles aren't really included in that. They just say tools of the trade. But the vehicle is a tool of the trade. He's probably got his name on the side of it. It's his business vehicle. He said, I explained the situation, but he fell on deaf ears, and he is adamant that he'll be taking my van, which is my only means of transport for work and only worth about £800. This is what's happening, that small self-employed people are getting absolutely pounded, and especially with things to do with motoring. Which is why it's really necessary now to keep up to speed on how to deflect a lot of this stuff, and it can be deflected. But this dart charge thing is an absolute pain in the neck because it escalates and escalates. Now when £2.50 turn into that £426, now £800. He said, I explained the situation, but it fell on deaf ears, and he's adamant he'd be taking the car. Yeah, I was going to pay as I thought I had to and had no choice about it. Now, this is the point. If you listen to our shows, you will realise there are remedies. Having now watched this video, I will not be paying a single penny to this bully bailiff. Well, that's great. So good luck to that guy. And I will be writing a response to him with some suggestions of what he can do to avoid paying these lot. If anyone can offer any advice, I'd be grateful. Thank you for reading this. For making it this far. Now I read that out because that's very typical of what's happening, and that fella is very modest. He's saying, this is what's happened to me, and basically thanks for reading it. So I hope he's going to become a listener to the shows, because we do have solutions for this stuff in the shows. But I had a report from a listener that a Marston's bailiff forced entry. Now that's illegal. So anybody out there has had this experience, especially with Marston's, of one of their bailiffs pushing them to get in the house. That's totally illegal. What they're allowed to do in their own rules basically is get peaceful entry, which means you never open the door to them. You must never open the door, because they'll put their foot inside the property, and then they've then got entry because they're on the threshold. So as soon as they put that foot over the door when you've opened the door, if you push them out, they'll call the police, and the police will always stand with them. So never open the door to them. That's rule number one. You never open the door to them. And make sure your windows are closed as well. I explained the situation, but fell on deaf ears. Yeah, that's it. That's that one. Sorry, I've just slipped here. If anyone else has had an employee of Marston's push past them, contact us. They're allowed peaceful entry, which means that they can get in through an open door. Now, we're going to have a look at Marston's website, because many people probably still don't know, but Marston's were actually bought out by Rothschild, and they've now actually partnered and taken over. I believe they've taken over NSL, which is absolutely incredible. So you've got it says, Marston wins. Oh yeah, they've won an Excellence in Enforcement award. They've also been shortlisted for 3 credit awards, the Credit Strategy Credit Awards. Marston wins Responsible Approach to Consumers Award. This is like a local council. It's incredible, isn't it? That they seem to be giving. Marston Holdings acquires NSL. Marston Holdings is pleased to announce that it's acquired NSL. So they now own NSL. So Rothschild Investments now own NSL, because that's who owns Marston's. That's absolutely incredible. Daniela Quicksilver joins Marston from Nathan Mayer Rothschild and Sons. So this is a totally Rothschild operation. Now, why don't people talk about that? Because, you've got people going, oh, Rothschild Zionists. Well, why don't they just go, oh, Rothschild Marstons? I mean, this is incredible stuff. This company you could do a whole show on their tactics, and they come round. They say they can put people in prison, which they can if you let them. I mean, anyone can put you in prison if you allow them to. And it's if you look at the Marston's website, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you'll see that it's an upside down pentagram inside a magical symbol made out of M's. So it's an upside down pentagram inside a load of M's, and that happened as soon as Rothschild took it on. They got a new design, all their website changed, and what that signifies is the hanged man upside down, because obviously the pentagram is the man upside down, you're inverted, and in their terms that would mean they're emptying your pockets, because the hanged man in the tarot is hung upside down and all his money's falling out of his pockets. So basically these people, I think, know what they're doing. Probably not the useful idiots who are in enforcement, but that to me is a sign of everything that they call a conspiracy theory. So Martin's back again. I'm glad you're in chat, actually, Martin. I will be doing some more promotion of this to get in the chat. It turns out the rules got slightly changed from common sense, that exempt vehicles don't pay to register. That costs, I think, a tenner a year. Yeah, so if you visit London less than once a year, it's not worth getting the exemption. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you open up an account with them, but that's the thing, that the majority of people who go through that will not actually know about it, So to keep the information coming in, I want to keep bringing our listeners well-researched and useful information, and basically just keep on sending information in, because I'm going to be covering all of this stuff, and I'm helping people in the background as these shows go out. I've got folders for the people who are sending stuff in. I've had stuff from all over the country. We have, for instance, absolute proof that Agenda 21 documents were being circulated in the year 2001 after the Climate Action Plan came in. Agenda 21, official documents in local councils. So all of those useful idiot councillors that think it's a conspiracy theory will just look into the history and have a look, and it's all there. So yeah, over the next few weeks, there's going to be some brilliant shows coming out. I'm on the road at the moment. I've been actually talking to a lot of people, and this a historic documentary that I'm going to be doing about the martyrs of Smithfield, and I will be looking for people who want to sponsor that in some way or other. In other words, help it get made, because they'll obviously be given a free copy of it or the rest of it. We're going to look into ways of marketing. If anybody out there is good at marketing and would like to promote our talks, I would be very grateful. I have somebody on board who said they would. I've had a phone call from Scotland from a radio station who also want to put our talks on up there. So if we can start linking this up, it'll be great. We're at the Sunrise Festival, 16th, 17th of August, I think that is. I'm at an event on the 9th and 10th of August in Pembrokeshire, which is private, but if people want to go to that, just get in touch. There's a few more things coming in. I wanted to get into parapsychology actually tonight, but I don't think we've got time. I'm just going to do an hour show tonight. So next week I'll get into more of that, but I think that's a very good summation of what's going on up and down the country. We've just got this incredible post-truth world now. It's getting to the point where you couldn't make this stuff up, and the people who actually started America would be turning in their graves, and they're Freemasons. So that tells you what sort of state we're in. And I just wanted to finish off with this quote, which we'll be going into in the next week.
Basically, it's about evidence from the lab in our body experiences. This is a book by Janet Lee Mitchell. It says society at large has been fairly ignorant of these experiences, and so it would seem suggestion alone cannot be influencing the many people to whom they occur spontaneously. In other words, like there is no real narrative on this stuff. It's been absolutely sidelined and pushed into a corner, and it carries on. Nor could suggestion easily explain out-of-body experiences in very young children who could not have obtained objective information about them. So this is it, you see. The reality of things is being totally subverted. People ignorant of this phenomenon often label reports like these from children as childhood fantasies. Now, that's an interesting thing, actually, that children do tend to have these, because we actually shut ourselves down, and the shutting down now is obviously on a very serious level. It's a great way to finish this part of the show. I think we're going to carry on next week with some stuff on parapsychology. So it's just in psychology, physiology and medicine, wherever a debate between the mystics and the scientifics has been once for all decided, it is the mystics who have usually proved to be right about the facts, while the scientists had the better of it in the respect to the theories. Now, theories aren't facts, you see, and that actually describes the whole of the climate change agenda. In other words, mystics, or real ones, not the fake gurus we've been talking about, real mystics, ones who've actually spent ages looking at reality and decoding it and actually putting it into a narrative, know more about it than scientists, because scientists are repeating what they've been told, or they're looking for the results in a paradigm which is very, very narrow, the narrow corridor of opinion. So it's like the 97% of scientists agree. No, they don't. It was just that they cherry-picked a few papers that agreed with the consensus. So we're nearly out of time there, but thanks for everyone who's listening, and next week we're going to go back to having a 2-hour show, and I've been on the road to these historical sites and I'm looking at more stuff as I go along. So thanks for listening to Windows on the World, and we'll see you all very soon.
Welcome to Windows on the World. I want to keep bringing our listeners well-researched and useful information. Please consider sponsoring our work by going to windowsontheworld.net and clicking the donate button.